The space race wasn't just Gagarin, giant leaps and flags in dust. It was also someone seriously going, what if we nuked the moon, just to flex? This is a story of smuggled sandwiches, laser guns for bear attacks, and two superpowers sprinting toward the stars, while tripping over their own egos in the dumbest ways possible. 1. You're commanding Gemini. 3. A marvel of engineering hurtling through space. Your biggest fear? A catastrophic explosion? A hull breach? Nope. It's a corned beef sandwich. Astronaut John Young, a true American hero who believed astronaut food tasted like compressed sadness, smuggled a sandwich on rye aboard the spacecraft. This wasn't just a snack. It was an act of delicious defiance against nutritional science. In 0G, the crumbs became tiny, insubordinate missiles of chaos, threatening to fry every circuit board. Imagine explaining that to taxpayers. Yes, the multi-billion-dollar capsule was disabled by a rogue caraway seed. When they got back, Congress went full-on Karen, holding an official hearing on the sandwich. A sandwich. They treated a deli item with the same gravity as a Soviet nuke, proving the most powerful force in the universe is American bureaucracy getting its panties in a twist. 2. The crew of Apollo 12 were not just astronauts. They were absolute legends of tomfoolery. Before they went to the actual moon, their buddies on the backup crew pulled off the greatest prank in history. They secretly laminated and hid tiny Playboy centerfolds inside the astronauts' official wrist-mounted checklists. This required mission control-level logistics, but for smuggling smut. So there's Commander Pete Conrad bouncing around doing serious geology, and he flips a page and bam! Hello, Miss December. It's a beautiful testament to the fact that no matter how far we travel from Earth, the male brain remains firmly in the gutter. Forget planting a flag. This was about planting the seeds of glorious, unfiltered bro humor where no man had planted them before. For science? Nah, man. For the boys. 3. We mastered orbital physics, but for the longest time we couldn't figure out how to take a dump in space without triggering a poop-ocalypse. The Apollo toilet was literally a plastic bag you had to tape to your own butt with surgical precision. This wasn't just a design flaw. It was a fundamental betrayal by the laws of physics. One false move and you've unleashed a 0G butt volcano inside a tin can. The Skylab toilet was a slight upgrade, but it was basically a high-tech vacuum cleaner with a target the size of a quarter. The simulator even had a camera inside the bowl so future heroes could practice their aim. This was the most high-stakes, low-reward video game ever created, giving a whole new, terrifying meaning to the phrase, Houston, we have a problem. 4. While America was writing angry letters about rye bread, the Soviets were playing a whole different game. Their cosmonauts, being Russian, understood that long, stressful journeys require refreshments. They became masters of smuggling cognac into orbit. While NASA was weighing food down to the last gram, these glorious bastards were running a celestial liquor store out of their spacesuits. They'd fill their official juice tubes with booze, labeling it prune extract to throw off the squares. This wasn't just for fun. It was a matter of national pride. You just know their mission control was in on it, like, okay, Dmitri, the flight plan says you will analyze cosmic rays, but we all know you're just finding a good spot to hotbox the Soyuz. It's proof that the spirit of Russia is stronger than gravity. 5. Imagine looking out your window and seeing the most beautiful, shimmering nebula you've ever witnessed. Now imagine finding out that it's made of frozen pea. The Apollo spacecraft didn't have room to store waste, so the geniuses at NASA decided to just yeet it into the void. This stream of astronaut urine would instantly freeze into a cloud of tiny glittering ice crystals, creating a majestic trail behind the ship. It was like God's own snow globe, if God had a bladder infection and a flair for the dramatic. This celestial phenomenon was a big glittering "Kilroy was here" sign written in frozen bodily fluids across the heavens. Imagine an alien civilization seeing this. Behold Zorp, the creatures from the third planet. Their first act of interstellar art is a piss cloud. 6. Before you could fly a rocket, NASA had to make sure your insides wouldn't turn into soup. Their tool for this was a giant spinning machine of pure evil they called a centrifuge, but which should have been called the Puka-Whirl 5000. Volunteering for this was like telling your doctor, "Hey, can you shake my skeleton loose from my meat suit for science?" They'd spin America's finest heroes until they could taste their own spleen, their organs trying to swap places. The experience was described as having an elephant sit on your chest while being spun by a drunk giant. This machine was less about data collection and more about finding out exactly what color a person turns right before their soul leaves their body. God bless America. 7. To find the sanest men alive to shoot into space, NASA employed psychologists who were clearly out of their goddamn minds. The psych tests were a masterclass in weirdness. They'd show a candidate a completely blank white card and ask, "What does this make you think of?" It was a total trap. The psychologists were clearly working through their own issues, using America's heroes as their lab rats. The whole process was a catch-22 from hell. If you were sane enough to realize the tests were insane, you were clearly too smart and untrustworthy. But if you went along with it, you were probably a lunatic. They were basically looking for a human golden retriever, smart, loyal, and just dumb enough not to question the absurdity of it all. 8. By 1985, the Cola Wars blasted into orbit. In the most 80s thing to ever happen, Coca-Cola and Pepsi spent fortunes inventing special space cans. Some of the world's best engineers, who could calculate a lunar trajectory in their sleep, were now tasked with stopping Coke from fizzing up an astronaut's nose. You can just picture the PowerPoint presentation. Synergy, 0G, the final frontier of refreshment. While everyone in the room dreams of their bonuses. The astronauts were unwilling lab rats in a corporate taste test from hell, forced to drink lukewarm, bubbly sugar water for a TV commercial. The mission was a monumental achievement in proving that capitalism's dumbest impulses have no earthly bounds. 9. The marketing team for Tang is the undisputed champion of selling absolute crap to the American public. They convinced an entire generation that their fluorescent orange powder was the official drink of the gods, the nectar that fueled our space heroes. The reality? Astronauts privately said it tasted like battery acid mixed with orange spray paint. They only drank it because the alternative was drinking NASA's recycled water, which had the delightful aftertaste of iodine and yesterday's coffee. Tang was a chemical agent of last resort, but on Earth, kids were downing it by the gallon, thinking one more glass would make them smart enough to be an astronaut. It was a masterclass in turning a borderline terrible product into a symbol of national pride, proving that with enough good advertising, you can make people believe anything. 10. Alan Shepard wasn't just the first American in space. He was the first American to treat another celestial body like his own personal country club. During the Apollo 14 mission, this absolute madman smuggled a 6-iron head and a few golf balls onto the goddamn moon. While the world watched, holding its breath for scientific discovery, Shepard was busy setting up the universe's most exclusive driving range. He duffed the first shot, but then claimed the second one flew for miles and miles. It's the most legendary golfer's lie ever told, and he told it from the moon. Billions of dollars, the pinnacle of human ingenuity, all so one guy could live out his fantasy of hitting a golf ball without having to worry about hitting a car in the parking lot. That, right there, is the American dream. 11. You can be a steely-eyed missile man, a hero to millions, and a pioneer on the final frontier. But for hours at a time, you're also a guy wearing a diaper. Let's not sugarcoat it with fancy names like maximum absorbency garment. It's a high-tech, government issue depends. For spacewalks that last for hours, astronauts have no choice but to just go. Inside a suit that costs more than a mansion. It's the ultimate humbling experience. Imagine floating over the Earth, contemplating the beauty of the cosmos, all while trying to ignore the fact that you're sitting in your own personal swamp. It's the universe's way of reminding our greatest heroes that, at the end of the day, they're just as much of a mess as the rest of us. 12. Gordon Cooper wasn't just an astronaut. He was an orbital-class troll. During his 1963 mission, he radioed down that he saw a glowing, greenish object closing in on his capsule. For a terrifying few minutes, mission control and tracking stations in Australia thought they were about to witness first contact live on the air. The world was on the brink of an alien invasion panic. But it was all a gag. Cooper knew exactly when he'd be flying over a secret tracking station and orchestrated the whole thing to screw with them. This man was given control of one of the most powerful machines on Earth, and he used it to pull off the most elaborate prank call in history. What an absolute star-spangled jackass. 13. The Apollo 10 crew, flying on the dark side of the moon, suddenly heard a ghostly whistling music in their headsets. Completely cut off from Earth, they freaked out. Was it aliens? The ghosts of dead cosmonauts? They were so scared of being grounded for insanity that they almost didn't report it. For decades, the transcripts were kept secret, fueling 1,000 UFO conspiracies. The truth, of course, was infinitely dumber. It was just radio interference between their two spacecraft. The haunting music of the cosmos was the celestial equivalent of your car stereo, making a weird noise when you get a phone call. The universe wasn't trying to communicate. It was just a case of $2 billion machines having bad reception. 14. America sent its best and brightest. The Soviet Union sent hobo dogs. They literally just rounded up stray dogs from the streets of Moscow, thinking if they could survive a Russian winter on their own, they could probably handle space. And after they came back, these dogs were treated like A-list celebrities. They were put in little tailored suits, paraded before cheering crowds, and presented as icons of communist superiority. These dogs went from dodging cars and fighting for scraps of bread to being chauffeured to state dinners. You can see it in their eyes in the old photos. Total, utter confusion. They have no clue what's going on. They're just happy someone's finally scratching them behind the ears. 15. Sometime in the 70s, a NASA scientist, probably after a long lunch, asked the question that was on nobody's mind. What if we got spiders high in space? Okay, maybe not high, but they did launch 2 spiders named Arabella and Anita to see if they could spin webs in zero gravity. The initial results were hilarious. The spiders just floated around, totally bewildered, and their first webs looked like a toddler's scribbles. They were basically drunk on weightlessness. But then, like true professionals, they got their act together and started spinning near-perfect webs. The experiment proved that spiders are not only terrifyingly adaptable, but are probably better suited for space travel than most humans. It was a bizarre, 8-legged leap for science. 16. The American astronaut survival kit had stuff like a knife and some flares. The Soviet cosmonaut survival kit had a goddamn laser pistol, a fully functional triple-barreled laser gun. The official reason was for signaling, or self-defense. Self-defense against what exactly? A grizzly bear you want to blind with the power of science? Let's be honest, they included it for one reason, and one reason only. It's a freaking laser gun. This wasn't a tool, it was a piece of pure Cold War fantasy. While Americans were preparing to survive in the wilderness, the Soviets were apparently preparing to fight off an alien invasion or reenact scenes from their favorite sci-fi movie. It was wildly impractical, totally unnecessary, and the coolest thing ever put on a spacecraft. 17. The Soviets looked at the vast emptiness of space and thought, you know what this needs? A giant cannon. In a move that escalated the space race from a scientific competition to a potential Michael Bay movie, they strapped a modified aircraft cannon to their Almaz military space station. This wasn't a metaphor. It was a real fire-breathing gun in orbit, capable of shredding enemy satellites or anything else that got in its way. They even test-fired it, successfully, proving that if push came to shove, they could absolutely start a shootout in space. While NASA was busy hitting golf balls, the Russians were turning low Earth orbit into the Wild West. It's the most gloriously paranoid and over-the-top piece of military hardware ever conceived, a true monument to Cold War crazy. 18. If the space cannon wasn't enough, the personal survival kits for cosmonauts were just as insane. If their capsule went off course and landed in the Siberian wilderness, they needed to be prepared. For what? Bears. Lots and lots of bears. So their standard issue kit included a machete and a triple-barreled shotgun that was also a rifle and a flare gun. It was a combination gun, the Swiss Army knife of blowing things away. Imagine being a cosmonaut. You've just survived atmospheric re-entry, you crawl out of your capsule in the middle of nowhere, and your first thought isn't, "I'm a hero of the Soviet Union." It's, "Okay, which one of these trees has a pissed-off bear behind it?" It's a uniquely Russian solution. Prepare for the cosmic void and a hungry grizzly with equal seriousness. 19. Today, your toaster probably has more computing power than the spacecraft that took men into orbit. The computer on the Project Gemini missions had a whopping 4 kilobytes of memory. Not gigabytes, not megabytes, kilobytes. Your average text message is bigger than that. This thing was less of a supercomputer and more of a glorified calculator that was prone to throwing a tantrum at the worst possible moment. The astronauts, who were test pilots and not computer nerds, had to enter commands using a clunky numerical keypad, and one wrong number could send them flying off towards Neptune. It was the digital equivalent of trying to fly a fighter jet with a broken Atari controller. The fact that it worked at all is a miracle of science and sheer dumb luck. 20. Gus Grissom was one of America's original heroes, but he had the worst luck imaginable. After his Mercury flight, the hatch on his capsule, Liberty Bell 7, blew open for no damn reason after splashdown. The capsule sank to the bottom of the ocean and Grissom almost drowned. For the rest of his life, people whispered that he'd panicked and blown the hatch himself, a rumor that haunted him forever. He insisted he didn't do it, and years later, evidence suggested it was a mechanical failure. But the damage was done. It's a uniquely American tragedy. You can be brave enough to get strapped to a rocket, but you'll still get screwed over by a single faulty bolt and a bunch of gossiping bureaucrats. He conquered space but was defeated by a bad spring. 21. In 1980, at a Titan II missile silo in Arkansas, a mechanic dropped a single wrench. It fell 70 feet, punctured the missile's fuel tank, and started a chain of events that could have ended civilization. The silo was home to a 9-megaton nuclear warhead, the single most destructive weapon in the U.S. arsenal, and it was now sitting on top of a leaking, highly explosive bomb. The subsequent explosion launched the warhead out of the silo, and it landed in a ditch a few hundred yards away. Thankfully, the safety features worked. But for a few terrifying hours, a dropped tool almost started World War III. It's a chilling reminder that the fate of the world doesn't always rest on grand decisions, but sometimes on one clumsy butterfingers having a really, really bad day at work. 22. In the late 1950s, the Soviets were parading their Lunar space probe around the world like a prize pig. The CIA, desperate to know its secrets, hatched a spy plan straight out of a goofy caper movie. While the probe was on a train tour, a team of CIA agents essentially kidnapped it for a night. They bribed the truck driver, diverted the convoy, and took the entire probe to a secret warehouse. There, they completely disassembled it, photographed every single component, put it all back together, and returned it to the train before the Soviets even knew it was gone. It was an act of pure, audacious thievery. They didn't use lasers or secret agents in tuxedos. They used good old-fashioned American ingenuity and a couple of well-placed bribes to pull off one of the greatest heists of the Cold War. 23. Cosmonaut. Sergei Krikalev holds a record he never wanted, the man who was stranded in space while his country ceased to exist. He launched in May 1991 as a citizen of the Soviet Union, heading for the Mir space station. While he was up there, the USSR collapsed in a chaotic heap. The new broke Russian government couldn't afford to send up his replacement, so they just left him up there. For 301 days, he orbited the Earth, a man without a country, watching his homeland literally change on the maps below. He finally returned to a nation he didn't recognize. It's the ultimate long-distance problem, being stuck at the office while the entire company goes bankrupt and changes its name. 24. NASA was run by geniuses, but they had a blind spot the size of Texas. They couldn't get life insurance for the Apollo astronauts. No company on Earth would take that bet. So the astronauts came up with a grim but brilliant backup plan. Before each mission, they would sign hundreds of postcards and envelopes, creating a stash of incredibly rare memorabilia. These insurance covers were given to their families. If the astronauts died, their families could sell these autographed items to survive. It was a morbid, last-ditch financial plan. It's a stunningly American solution to a problem. If the government can't protect you, find a way to monetize your own potential death. It's both deeply sad and an incredible example of resourceful, capitalist thinking. 25. The White House is prepared for anything, which apparently includes writing fan fiction about astronauts dying in the most poetic way possible. Tucked away in a file cabinet was a speech, written for President Nixon, titled, "In Event of Moon Disaster." If Armstrong and Aldrin got stranded, the plan was simple. Mission Control would just cut communications, leaving them to their fate like a bad Tinder date after the check arrives. A clergyman would then say some words, and Nixon would go on TV to deliver this chillingly beautiful eulogy about the heroes America had just abandoned to die on a rock 240,000 miles away. It's a level of cold, calculating pragmatism that is both terrifying and, you have to admit, weirdly impressive. Someone had to sit there and write that, probably while other people were planning the victory parade. It's a masterpiece of PR spin, turning "we screwed up and can't get them back" into a noble sacrifice for all mankind, ensuring that even in catastrophic failure, America still comes out looking tragically heroic. 26. In 1974, the crew of the Skylab space station did the most American thing imaginable. They went on strike. Against NASA. In space. The astronauts were being driven into the ground by a ridiculously detailed, minute-by-minute schedule from Mission Control, where every single second of their day was planned, likely including bathroom breaks and designated stare into the void time. They were basically being micromanaged from another planet by people who weren't weightless. Fed up with being treated like clock-punching lab monkeys, the crew just turned off their radio, effectively ghosting the entire planet Earth. You can just imagine the sheer panic at Mission Control as they realized their multi-billion-dollar space station crew had put them on Do Not Disturb. For a full day, they just chilled out and took in the view, a glorious middle finger to management that traveled at 17,500 miles per hour, proving that the right to tell your boss to shove it is, in fact, a universal human right. 27. In the early days, some NASA engineer, likely after 3 martinis at lunch, pitched the idea of an inflatable space station. The rest of the scientific community collectively agreed this was the single dumbest idea they had ever heard. A giant balloon in a vacuum filled with space bullets traveling at orbital velocity? It was a suicidal bouncy castle for astronauts, a cosmic party favor waiting to pop with the first micrometeoroid. The idea was laughed out of every meeting it was brought up in, a certified crackpot theory. Fast forward a few decades, and inflatable habitats are now considered one of the smartest and most practical ways to build bases on the Moon and Mars. It's a perfect lesson that the line between batshit crazy and visionary genius is often just a matter of waiting for everyone else to catch up. The original engineer probably spent years feeling like a vindicated king, bringing it up at every single family gathering. 28. You'd think the original tapes of the Apollo 11 moon landing would be stored in a vault guarded by sharks with laser beams. You would be dead wrong. In a moment of bureaucratic genius that could only come from a government agency, NASA lost them. They didn't just misplace them, they taped over them. To save what probably amounted to a few $100, some guy named Stan in accounting likely saw the budget for new tapes, said, "We can trim that," and authorized the reuse of some old ones labeled moon stuff. The single greatest achievement in human history was erased to make way for what was probably some boring weather satellite data from Des Moines. It's the cosmic equivalent of pawning a Nobel Prize to buy a pack of cigarettes, and the most painful, profoundly dumb oops in the history of everything. It's a mistake so big, it's almost admirable in its sheer, world-class incompetence. 29. Soviet probes sent to Mars had a nasty habit of just dying. They'd get close to the red planet and then suddenly go silent, break down, or fly off into oblivion. The failures were so consistent that the engineers, in a fit of pure Russian fatalism, gave up on science and blamed the supernatural. They claimed a galactic ghoul was haunting the space around Mars and eating their spacecraft. This wasn't just a funny nickname. It was their official, unofficial explanation for a string of failures so epic it seemed like a curse. You can just imagine the debriefings in Moscow. Comrade General, the telemetry is clear. The ghoul was hungry again. It's a perfect example of what happens when your engineering is so consistently bad, it feels more plausible to believe in space monsters than to admit you messed up the wiring. Again, it's a beautifully human way to deal with the fact that your rockets just plain sucked. 30. In 1959, the US Army, suffering from a severe case of not being the center of attention, came up with Project Horizon, a top-secret plan to build a heavily armed military fortress on the moon. This wasn't a science base. This was a lunar Death Star staffed by soldier astronauts whose mission was to achieve the ultimate high ground. The detailed plans included nuclear reactors and claymore mines designed to pop out of the lunar dust to greet any uninvited Soviet guests. It was pure, uncut, weapons-grade paranoia. The Army saw the serene beauty of the moon and thought, you know, this place needs more machine gun nests and a well-defended chow hall. It proved that no matter how far we go, the first human instinct is to figure out how to weaponize the landscape, complain about the food, and then probably draw dicks on the moon rocks when the commander isn't looking. 31. As if a moon fortress wasn't enough, the US Air Force had an even more unhinged idea: Project ASO-19. The plan was terrifyingly simple: nuke the moon. The goal wasn't scientific. The entire point was to set off a nuclear bomb on the lunar surface that would be so bright, the mushroom cloud would be visible from Earth with the naked eye. This was meant to be the ultimate geopolitical flex, a way to scare the Soviets into submission by showing them we were crazy enough to punch the moon in the face with an atom bomb. It's the foreign policy equivalent of keying someone's car because they looked at you funny. Thankfully, some sane person in the room pointed out that this might be a tad aggressive and could make us look like cosmic villains, ending the most idiotic pissing contest in history before it even started. It was a plan born from the part of the American psyche that believes any problem can be solved with a sufficiently large explosion. 32. Project Orion is, without a doubt, the most beautifully insane and profoundly American idea ever conceived. The plan? A massive spaceship powered by a continuous stream of nuclear bomb explosions. The ship would carry thousands of atomic bombs, drop them out the back one by one through a hole, and ride the shockwaves like a surfer on a wave of pure Armageddon. The safety briefing must have been incredible. Okay, Rule 1, don't miss the shock plate. There is no Rule 2. It was the brainchild of engineers who clearly saw a nuclear explosion and thought, my turn. It was a glorious, terrifying dream of surfing to the stars on a pillar of atomic fire. The vehicular equivalent of a bald eagle screaming the national anthem while firing 2 shotguns at once. It was so crazy, so dangerous, and so brilliant that it's a genuine tragedy it never got built. 33. While America was building the Saturn V, a majestic and reliable masterpiece of engineering, the Soviet Union was building its counterpart, the N-1 rocket. And the N-1 was, without a doubt, the single greatest fireworks display in human history. This absolute beast of a machine was the Soviets' ticket to the moon. But it had a tiny design flaw. It was essentially a controlled explosion that refused to stay controlled. The first stage had 30, that's 30 rocket engines, strapped to its ass. This wasn't a symphony of controlled power like the Saturn V. It was a heavy metal drum solo of chaos, a plumber's nightmare of pipes and fuel lines that all had to work in perfect unison. And they never, ever did. On its most famous launch attempt in 1969, the N-1 lifted just a few hundred feet off the pad before deciding it was tired of being a rocket and wanted to be a fireball instead. It fell back down and detonated with the force of one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history, completely vaporizing the entire launch complex and re-landscaping a significant portion of Kazakhstan. And the best part? They tried this 4 separate times. 4 times they lit the fuse on the world's biggest Roman candle and were shocked when it ended in a glorious, expensive failure. The N-1 rocket wasn't just a failed moonshot. It was a recurring, multi-billion ruble lesson in how not to build a rocket. Now the real question, who was dumber in space? The US with its branding, diapers, and soft drink lawsuits? Or the USSR with vodka, cannons, and pure hope it doesn't explode energy? Drop your vote in the comments. And if you want more glorious space-age stupidity from human history, you know what to do with that like and subscribe button.